Michael Thornton's peaceful morning routine of coffee on his riverside dock was shattered by the unmistakable mechanical whir of a delivery truck backing up. He squinted against the early autumn sun, watching in disbelief as two men struggled to unload what appeared to be an enormous box from the flatbed. The coffee in his hand suddenly tasted bitter as recognition dawned. That was a hot tub, and they were heading straight for his private dock. "Excuse me," Michael called out, setting his mug down with more force than intended. "I think you got the wrong address." The delivery men paused, looking up from their clipboard with matching expressions of confusion. "This is Riverside Lane, dock number 14, right?" "Yes, but I didn't order a hot tub." Michael gestured to the massive package. "That's definitely not mine." One of the men shrugged, his indifference palpable. "Look, buddy, we just deliver. Says here it's for a Ms. Peterson at this dock." The name hit Michael like a bucket of ice water. Diane Peterson, known throughout the Riverside community as Karen for her notorious entitlement, lived 3 properties down in the sprawling mansion with the manicured lawns and security cameras. She'd been trying to expand her territory since moving in 2 years ago, repeatedly complaining about Michael's unsightly fishing gear and the occasional friends who came by to use his dock for kayaking. "Ms. Peterson doesn't own this dock," Michael said firmly, his temples beginning to throb. "I do. This is my property." The second delivery man stepped forward, clearly wanting to be done with the conversation. "Sir, we've got 5 more deliveries today. The order says dock 14, and we're leaving it at dock 14. Take it up with the customer." Before Michael could protest further, his phone rang, Diane Peterson's name flashing across the screen. With a sinking feeling, he answered. "Michael, darling," came the saccharine voice that had become the soundtrack to his neighborhood disputes. "I see my little surprise has arrived. Isn't it fabulous?" "Diane," Michael replied, watching helplessly as the men began positioning the hot tub at the end of his dock. "You can't just install a hot tub on someone else's property. This is trespassing." Her laugh tinkled through the speaker. "Oh, don't be so dramatic. I've been meaning to talk to you about this. The community board actually approved my proposal last month to extend shared amenities to the waterfront. Your dock is the perfect spot. It's the most sun in the afternoon." "What community board?" Michael's voice rose an octave. "This is private property, my property. I never agreed to any of this." "Well, you never attend the meetings, dear. Absence implies consent. Besides, I already paid for installation. The men will have it running by this evening, and I'm hosting a little dock warming party tomorrow. You're invited, of course." Michael watched in stunned silence as the delivery men finished positioning the hot tub, which now occupied nearly the entire end section of his dock. One of them handed him a packet. "Owner's manual," the man said flatly. "Electrician will be by this afternoon to hook it up." After they left, Michael stood alone on his dock, the owner's manual clutched in his white-knuckled grip. The glossy cover featured a happy family enjoying their luxury spa experience. Nothing like the fury building inside him. He'd dealt with Diane's boundary issues before. The time she'd trimmed his riverside willows because they'd blocked her view, or when she'd installed a gate between their properties without permission. But this was a new level of audacity. Michael pulled out his phone and called his cousin, who happened to be a property lawyer. "James, you're not going to believe what just happened." He stared at the monstrosity now dominating his peaceful dock. "I need to know exactly what my rights are here because things are about to get interesting." As he ended the call, Michael noticed Diane Peterson standing on her balcony, champagne flute in hand, waving at him with the self-satisfied smile of someone who always got her way. He forced himself to wave back, already formulating a plan that would wipe that smile right off her face. The hot tub hummed innocently in the autumn breeze, unaware it was about to become the centerpiece of the most theatrical neighborhood dispute Riverside Lane had ever witnessed. The electrician arrived precisely at 3 o'clock, toolbox in hand, and a sympathetic expression already forming as Michael explained the situation. "Not the first time I've seen this kind of thing with Ms. Peterson," the electrician Dave confided as he examined the dock. "She had me install landscape lighting on her neighbor's side of the property line last summer. Poor old man didn't even realize until his water bill spiked from the connection." Michael paced the length of his dock, the hot tub's presence like a splinter in his consciousness. "Is there any way you could just not hook it up? Claim it's unsafe or something?" Dave scratched his beard thoughtfully. "I could, but she'd just hire someone else. Someone who might not follow code." He glanced at the water flowing beneath them. Electricity and water are a dangerous mix when done wrong. With reluctant acceptance, Michael watched Dave work, mentally calculating his options. His cousin James had called back with clear advice. Document everything. File a formal trespassing complaint, and prepare for a potentially lengthy legal battle. Diane Peterson had friends on the town council and a reputation for dragging out disputes until her opponents simply gave up from exhaustion. All set, Dave announced, closing his toolbox. Though I'd recommend not using it until the permanent inspector comes by. Should be scheduled for tomorrow morning. Michael raised an eyebrow. Permit inspector? Yes, sir. Hot tubs on waterfront structures require special permits in this county, environmental regulations, and structural load assessments. Ms. Peterson knows that, of course. Dave handed Michael a business card. I've worked with this inspector before. Frank's a straight shooter. After Dave left, Michael made a call to Frank, confirming the inspection was indeed scheduled, though Diane had apparently tried to expedite it to before her planned dock warming party. The inspector assured Michael that as the property owner, he had final say on the installation. That evening, Michael sat on his porch watching the sunset paint the river in fiery oranges and pinks. The hot tub hummed at the end of his dock, steam rising into the cool evening air. His phone buzzed with a text from Diane. Testing the water temperature now. Perfect for tomorrow's soiree. First guests arriving at 4 p.m. Wear something casual, chick. Michael didn't respond. Instead, he called his sister Rachel, who worked for the local newspaper. How would you like an exclusive on a story about property rights and the abuse of influence in our community? He asked, explaining the situation. Rachel laughed. Diane Peterson strikes again. Actually, this might make for a great piece in our Community Matters section. I'll bring a photographer by tomorrow. The next morning, Michael was awakened by the sound of splashing and feminine laughter. He peered through his blinds to witness Diane and two friends already enjoying his dock, mimosas in hand, wearing designer swimwear despite the autumn chill. They had hung decorative lanterns along the railings and set up a portable bar on his dock. He dressed quickly and headed down to the water, armed with his property deed and a calm demeanor carefully practiced in the mirror. Good morning, ladies, he called out pleasantly, recording the encounter on his phone. I'm afraid I need to inform you that you're trespassing on private property. Diane's smile didn't falter as she sipped her mimosa. Michael, darling, come join us. The water is divine. Diane, I've already spoken with the permit inspector. This installation wasn't authorized, and my lawyer has advised me that I have every right to request your immediate removal from my property. One of Diane's friends shifted uncomfortably, but Diane merely waved her hand dismissively. Always so serious. This is a community dock now, dear. I've already spoken with the mayor about it. Why don't you join us instead of being difficult? Michael noticed a small crowd gathering along the riverbank, neighbors watching the confrontation unfold with undisguised interest. Among them was Frank the inspector, clipboard in hand, arriving earlier than scheduled. Ms. Peterson, Frank called out, approaching the dock. I need to speak with you regarding this installation. What followed was a masterclass in bureaucratic procedure as Frank methodically went through his checklist, noting multiple violations, from the missing environmental impact assessment to the lack of structural reinforcement needed for the additional weight on the aging wooden dock. Bottom line, Frank concluded, this installation is not up to code and poses both an environmental and safety risk. It needs to be removed within 48 hours or the property owner will face fines. He looked pointedly at Michael. As the deed holder, you're ultimately responsible, sir. Diane's face flushed crimson as her friends hastily gathered their belongings. This is ridiculous. Do you know how much I paid for this installation? Perhaps you should have checked the regulations first, Michael suggested mildly, satisfaction warming him more than any hot tub could. As Diane and her friends stormed off, Michael thanked Frank and asked about the removal process. The answer deflated his momentary victory. That's on you as the property owner. Since it's on your land, you'll need to arrange and cover removal costs, then seek reimbursement from Ms. Peterson through civil court. Michael's sister arrived with a photographer, just in time to capture his expression of disbelief. The estimated cost for professional removal and transport back to Diane's property, nearly $2,000. Well, Rachel said, snapping pictures of the illegally installed hot tub. At least you'll have documentation for your case. Later that afternoon, Michael received a text from Diane. This isn't over, Michael. My attorney says you should expect to hear from him Monday morning. Enjoy the eyesore on your precious dock until then. Michael stared at the message, then at the hot tub still bubbling contentedly at the end of his dock. The river flowed swiftly beyond it, currents swirling in hypnotic patterns. Something in that current sparked an idea, a terribly tempting, deliciously petty idea. He called his old friend Jake, who worked at the marina downstream. Hey Jake, quick hypothetical question. If something large were to, say, accidentally float down the river tonight, would your security cameras catch it? A half-moon hung in the sky, casting silver ripples across the water as Michael stood on his dock at 2:17 a.m. The neighborhood was silent save for the gentle lapping of the river against the wooden posts and the persistent bubbling of Diane's hot tub, a sound that had kept him awake for 2 nights straight. He tugged at the thick work gloves he borrowed from his garage and surveyed his preparations. 4 hours earlier, he had carefully disconnected the electrical components, following the wiring diagram from the owner's manual backward and taking photos of each step. The extension cord and makeshift junction box Diane's electrician had installed were now safely stored in a waterproof container as evidence. This is either the dumbest thing I've ever done or the most satisfying, Michael muttered to himself, double-checking that his phone was recording. He needed documentation that he hadn't damaged the hot tub, just relocated it. He'd already cleared the dock of Diane's decorative lanterns and portable bar, placing them neatly in storage bins at the base of his property with a note indicating where she could retrieve her belongings. The hot tub itself now sat unanchored, the water inside still warm but no longer circulating. Michael had spent the afternoon studying the tides and currents of the river, consulting online maps and speaking with Jake about the downstream flow. At this time of night, with this water level, anything set adrift would likely travel approximately 3 miles before the river widened into a calm section near the public marina. Jake had promised to keep an eye out and discover the floating hot tub during his early morning shift. The legal implications weighed heavily on Michael. His cousin James had been horrified when Michael hinted at his plan, reciting potential charges ranging from destruction of property to creating a water hazard. But something in Michael had snapped after Diane's text message and her blatant disregard for boundaries. Sometimes conventional solutions weren't enough against unconventional adversaries. Just a little nudge, Michael whispered, positioning himself at the landward side of the hot tub. A controlled relocation. He had already loosened the temporary fasteners the installers had used to secure the tub to his dock. Now all it would take was steady pressure to guide it off the edge and into the current. As he prepared for the final push, a twig snapped behind him. "I thought I might find you out here," came a familiar voice. Michael whirled around to find his neighbor Walter standing at the base of the dock, arms crossed over his flannel robe. The 70-year-old retired judge had been a fixture on Riverside Lane long before Diane Peterson arrived with her renovation crews and social climbing ambitions. "Walter," Michael acknowledged, heart hammering in his chest. "It's not what it looks like." Walter approached slowly, his weathered face impassive in the moonlight. "Isn't it? Looks to me like you're about to send that monstrosity on a little journey." Michael's shoulders slumped. "She's threatening legal action, Walter. You know how she operates. She'll drag this out for months, and meanwhile, I'm stuck with her hot tub and her friends partying on my dock." Walter stood beside Michael now, both men gazing at the offending spa. After a long moment, Walter spoke. "Did I ever tell you about the time Diane tried to have my boathouse condemned? Claimed it was an eyesore and reduced her property values. What happened? Judge Williams, an old fishing buddy of mine, mysteriously lost her paperwork. Twice." Walter's eyes twinkled with mischief. "Some battles you fight in the courtroom. Others require alternative tactics." Michael stared at his elderly neighbor, understanding dawning slowly. "Walter, are you saying?" The old judge rolled up the sleeves of his robe. "I'm saying this hot tub looks heavy, and you might need a hand getting it properly settled in the current. 2 points of pressure will ensure it doesn't spin as it enters the water." For a moment, Michael could only gape. Then a slow grin spread across his face. "I appreciate the hydrodynamics lesson, Your Honor." Working together, they positioned themselves on opposite sides of the hot tub. Walter counted down softly. 3, 2, 1. With synchronized effort, they pushed the hot tub toward the edge of the dock. For a terrifying moment, it seemed too heavy to move. Then momentum took over. The tub slid forward with surprising grace, teetered at the edge of the dock, and slipped into the water with a muted splash that seemed deafening in the night's silence. Both men froze, watching as the hot tub bobbed momentarily and caught the current. The moonlight gleamed off its surface as it began its journey downstream, water sloshing gently over its sides. "Beautiful," Walter murmured, as though appreciating a piece of performance art. "Almost poetic." Michael couldn't help but laugh, tension releasing from his body. "I cannot believe we just did that." "Did what?" Walter asked innocently, already turning back toward shore. "I'm a heavy sleeper. Never left my bed tonight. Sleep apnea, you know." He tapped his nose conspiratorially. "I'd suggest you develop a similar condition by morning." As Walter disappeared back toward his house, Michael remained on the dock, watching the hot tub grow smaller as the current carried it away. He sent a quick text to Jake with a single word: "Launched." The reply came seconds later: "Roger that. The recovery team awaits your package." By the time Michael crawled back into bed, the hot tub was well on its way to the marina, and his dock was once again his own. He fell asleep instantly, the sound of bubbling jets no longer disturbing his peace. Morning arrived with golden sunlight and birdsong, and the shrill sound of Diane Peterson's voice carrying across the lawn. "What have you done?" Michael shuffled onto his porch in his bathrobe, clutching a coffee mug and affecting his best confused expression. Diane stood at the edge of his dock, designer sunglasses pushed up into her perfectly highlighted hair, pointing frantically at the empty space where her hot tub had been. "Good morning, Diane," he called pleasantly. "Is something wrong?" "My hot tub. It's gone." She stormed up from the dock, smartphone clutched like a weapon. "I know you did this, Michael. This is theft. Destruction of property. I'm calling the police immediately." Michael took a calm sip of his coffee. "That seems appropriate. I was actually about to call them myself to report an unusual occurrence. Sometime during the night, that unpermitted structure that was placed on my dock without authorization seems to have drifted away." "Drifted away?" Diane's voice rose to a pitch that set nearby birds scattering. "Hot tubs don't just drift away. Well, when they're improperly secured to a waterfront structure without proper permits or owner consent, I suppose anything is possible." Michael gestured to the river. Mother Nature can be so unpredictable. Diane's face contorted through several expressions before settling on calculated rage. "You think you're clever, don't you? You have no idea who you're dealing with." As if on cue, Michael's phone chimed with a text from Jake. "Package received at Marina. Quite the conversation piece this morning." Michael smiled serenely at Diane. "Actually, I think I have a very good idea who I'm dealing with now. Coffee." By noon, the Riverside Lane community was abuzz with the news of the traveling hot tub. 2 police officers had arrived at Michael's house shortly after Diane stormed off to call everyone she knew. Officer Martinez and Officer Chen sat at Michael's kitchen table, maintaining admirably straight faces as they took his statement. "So you're saying you have no knowledge of how Ms. Peterson's hot tub, which was installed on your dock without permission, ended up 3 miles downstream at the marina?" Officer Martinez clarified, pen hovering above his notepad. "That's correct," Michael replied, sliding across copies of his property deed, the failed inspection report, and printed screenshots of Diane's text messages. "I can only assume that the combination of it being improperly secured and last night's unusually strong current created the perfect conditions for spontaneous relocation." Officer Chen's lips twitched. "Spontaneous relocation. I see. I believe Frank Delgado from the county inspector's office has already provided a statement confirming the installation was unauthorized and posed a safety hazard," Michael added. The officers exchanged glances. "He has," Officer Martinez confirmed, as has the marina manager, who reported finding the hot tub this morning intact and causing no hazards to navigation. "How fortunate," Michael murmured. As the officers prepared to leave, Officer Chen paused at the door. "Just between us, Mr. Thornton, this isn't the first complaint we've had about Ms. Peterson. Last month, she called because her neighbor's wind chimes were psychologically distressing her guests. Community policing is always interesting. Around here," Officer Martinez added with a meaningful look. After they left, Michael's phone rang. It was his sister, Rachel. "Your famous big brother. Or rather, the hot tub is. Someone posted a video of it floating majestically down the river at sunrise. It's already got 15,000 views on TikTok." Michael groaned. "Please tell me I'm not in the video." "Nope, just the hot tub looking like some kind of avant-garde art installation. People are calling it the Freedom Spa and Hot Tub Time Machine. The Escape. Someone even added that my heart will go on theme from Titanic." Michael couldn't help but laugh. "Well, at least." A sharp knock at his door interrupted the conversation. Through the side window, Michael could see Diane standing on his porch, accompanied by a man in an expensive suit carrying a leather briefcase. "I got to go," he told Rachel. "The sequel has arrived." The man introduced himself as Harrison Wells, Diane's attorney, and presented Michael with a document detailing damages in the amount of $15,000 for the theft and endangerment of his client's property. "We're prepared to settle this matter quietly," Wells said smoothly, "provided you take full responsibility, cover all costs including the hot tub's value, installation fees, removal from the marina, emotional distress, and legal fees." Michael remained calm. "I'll have my attorney review this. Though I should mention that my security camera captured Ms. Peterson's unauthorized installation, and I have multiple witnesses to her admission that she never sought my permission to use my property." The lie about the security camera was a gamble. Michael had no such footage, but the slight widening of Diane's eyes told him it hit its mark. "Furthermore," Michael continued, "I've already filed a trespassing complaint and have documentation of the county inspector's determination that the installation violated multiple codes. If you'd like to proceed with litigation, I'm happy to have this all on public record." Before Wells could respond, Walter appeared at the garden gate, walking his elderly golden retriever. "Everything all right here, Michael?" The retired judge called out, eyeing the lawyer with interest. "Judge Walter Simmons," Diane's attorney murmured in recognition, his confidence visibly deflating. "Mr. Wells," Walter acknowledged with a nod. "Representing Ms. Peterson, I take it? Interesting case you got brewing. Reminds me of Thornburg v. Westbrook back in '09. Waterfront property dispute. Judge ruled that unauthorized structures placed on private docks constituted trespassing and the owner had no obligation to safeguard trespassing property. He smiled benignly. Fascinating precedent. Wells cleared his throat. We'll need to review our position in light of all available evidence. We'll be in touch, Mr. Thornton. As they walked away, Michael heard Diane hissing at her lawyer. You said this was a slam dunk. Within an hour, Michael's phone was inundated with text messages and calls from neighbors he barely knew, most expressing variations of about time someone stood up to her and you're a local hero. Apparently, Diane's reign of entitlement had affected more people than he realized. By evening, Michael's cousin James called with news. Wells contacted me. They're dropping all claims against you in exchange for mutual non-disparagement and you waiving any trespassing claims against Diane. That's it, Michael asked, surprised. That's it. No money changing hands either way. My guess? Their case was shaky to begin with, and once they realized the community's sentiment was against her, they decided to cut their losses. After ending the call, Michael poured himself a well-deserved glass of whiskey and walked out to his dock. The sunset painted the river in warm amber tones, the space at the end of his dock blissfully empty. The silence felt like a victory in itself. His peaceful contemplation was interrupted by approaching footsteps. Turning, he saw a group of neighbors walking down his lawn toward the dock led by Walter. They carried folding chairs, coolers, and what appeared to be a cake. Hope you don't mind, Walter called out, but we thought a proper dock warming party was in order. One that's actually authorized by the owner. As the neighbors set up their chairs on his lawn, carefully asking permission before placing anything on his property, Michael was handed a piece of cake with decorative blue frosting that unmistakably depicted a hot tub with tiny waves around it. The bakery was confused by the request, admitted Walter's wife Eleanor, but they did their best. Laughter rippled through the group as someone passed Michael a framed certificate declaring him Riverside Lane's defender of property rights. As twilight settled over the river and neighbors shared stories of their 3 months had passed since the hot tub made its unscheduled voyage down the river. Winter had settled over Riverside Lane, dusting the docks with occasional snow and freezing the edges of the water into delicate crystalline patterns. Michael stood on his dock, bundled against the December chill, sipping hot coffee and admiring the pristine tranquility of the scene. His dock remained blissfully free of unauthorized installations, though he'd added his own improvements. A simple wooden bench, a small fire pit safely distanced from the wooden planks, and a modest fishing equipment cabinet that Walter had helped him build. In the weeks following what locals now refer to as the hot tub incident, life on Riverside Lane had transformed in subtle but meaningful ways. Neighbors who had previously kept to themselves now waved and stopped to chat. Impromptu gatherings appeared on weekends, respectfully held on public areas or with explicit invitations to private properties. A community board had been legitimately established, with Michael reluctantly accepting a position after being nominated by unanimous vote. The hot tub itself had become something of a local celebrity. After sitting at the marina for 2 weeks with no claim from Diane, it had been auctioned off as abandoned property. Jake had informed Michael that the winning bid came from the owner of Riverside Brewing Company, who installed it on their public deck overlooking the water. They renamed their winter seasonal ale Dock Drifter and featured a stylized image of a floating hot tub on the label. Michael had received a lifetime supply of free beer for inspiration, though the brewery owner was careful never to directly acknowledge the connection to the actual event. As for Diane Peterson, the aftermath had been equally transformative, though not in ways she would have chosen. The day after the impromptu dock party, a formal letter had arrived at every home on Riverside Lane, signed by Diane and her attorney, expressing regrets for any misunderstandings regarding property boundaries and community expectations. The carefully worded non-apology nevertheless represented a stunning retreat for someone who had previously steamrolled through the neighborhood with impunity. More surprising was what happened next. Diane began making genuine, if awkward, attempts at proper neighborly behavior. She actually requested permission before placing holiday decorations near shared property lines. She attended legitimate community meetings and listened more than she spoke. When she hosted an autumn garden party, proper invitations were sent, and the music ended promptly at 9 p.m. as promised. Michael's reverie was interrupted by the sound of footsteps on the wooden planks of his dock. He turned to find Diane approaching, carrying a small gift bag and looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "Michael," she greeted him, maintaining a respectful distance. "I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all," he replied, genuinely curious about this unexpected visit. "What brings you down to my dock?" She held out the gift bag. "A holiday peace offering, I suppose." Michael accepted it cautiously, half expecting to find legal papers inside. Instead, he pulled out a beautifully crafted miniature wooden boat with tiny oars and, improbably, a miniature hot tub mounted in its center. I had it custom made, Diane explained, a hint of her old confidence returning. I thought your mantle might need a conversation piece for the holidays. Michael couldn't help but laugh. This is surprisingly thoughtful, Diane, and shows a sense of humor I didn't know you had. She shrugged, gazing out at the river. I had some time to reflect. My therapist says I have boundary issues stemming from childhood insecurities. A self-deprecating smile crossed her face. Apparently, installing hot tubs on other people's property without permission is a textbook example. Your therapist sounds insightful, Michael replied, turning the little boat in his hands. The thing is, Diane continued, surprising him with her candor, I'd always equated being noticed with being respected. It took a floating hot tub and becoming the neighborhood cautionary tale to realize there's a difference. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching a family of ducks navigate the partially frozen water. The community board is meeting next week to discuss the spring riverside cleanup, Michael said finally. We could use someone with your organizational skills. I'd like that, Diane replied, though I promise to limit my contributions to what's actually been approved by the group. As she turned to leave, she paused. By the way, I never asked, how did you actually get that hot tub into the river? It had to weigh at least 800 pounds, even partly drained. Michael smiled enigmatically. Let's just say it helped finding its true purpose in life. Well played, Michael Thornton, she said with grudging respect. Well played indeed. After Diane departed, Walter appeared as if he'd been waiting nearby, his golden retriever plodding faithfully beside him. Fraternizing with the enemy, the old judge asked with a twinkle in his eye. Michael showed him the miniature boat, peace offering, and possibly the first sign of genuine self-awareness I've seen from her. Walter nodded approvingly. People can surprise you if you give them the chance. Sometimes, they just need a little redirection. Speaking of redirections, Michael said, I never properly thanked you for your help that night. I couldn't have done it alone. Walter waved away the gratitude. In my 30 years on the bench, I learned that justice comes in many forms. Sometimes it's a legal judgment. Sometimes it's a community coming together. He smiled mischievously, and sometimes it's a hot tub finding its way to freedom. They both chuckled, watching their breath-formed clouds in the winter air. The marina's hosting a winter festival next weekend, Walter mentioned. The Dock Drifter hot tub is being featured as a polar plunge attraction. Half the neighborhood has signed up. But not you. Michael asked. At my age, not a chance. But I'm happy to stand on the sidelines and judge everyone else's form as they jump in. Old habits die hard. As the sun began its early winter descent, neighbors emerged from their homes for an impromptu sunset gathering. Someone had brought thermoses of hot chocolate. Another had homemade cookies. Children played tag between the adults, their laughter carrying across the water. Even Diane joined them eventually, standing somewhat awkwardly at the edge of the group until Eleanor Walter kindly drew her into a conversation about the spring planting schedule for the community flower beds. Michael surveyed the scene with quiet satisfaction. His dock remained his own, but something larger had been reclaimed as well, a sense of community that had been gradually eroded by entitlement and passive acceptance. Later that evening, as the gathering dispersed and neighbors returned to their homes, Michael placed the miniature hot tub boat on his mantle. It made him smile to think of how his single act of rebellion, of literally pushing back against unwanted intrusion, had created such unforeseen ripples. His phone chimed with a notification, a local news alert announcing that Hot Tub River Cruise had been officially nominated for Community Event of the Year in the county's annual Civic Awards. The accompanying photo showed the now-famous hot tub in its new home at the brewery, festively decorated for the holidays with a small plaque that read, Some journeys begin with a single push. Michael raised his glass to the miniature boat on his mantle. To boundaries he toasted silently and the courage to defend them. Outside, the river continued its eternal flow, carrying away the old year and bringing in the new, its currents connecting the community in ways both seen and unseen. And on Michael's dock, for the first time in months, everything was exactly as it should be. The end.